you got to have water. And I'm not talking about a well. People buy land and they dig a well. Some source of water is super, super important for survival. Filters are great, but it's nice if you can just drink it right out of the ground, because the ground has the ability to filter it as well. There was a farmer, I should say, a gardener that stayed with us for a while, and he had 4 boys, and their mom had passed. So these little kids, they were pretty young. I think Chris and David were maybe 7 and 9 or something like that, and they wanted to go on this adventure with me. Near Yolobola is the Trinity Alps. So we headed into the Trinity Alps, and this was, I'm trying to remember if it was fall or spring, but it was a time when there was still some snow and some potential rainstorms. And we get up, clear up to a rock called Castle Craig's Rocks, and it's pretty, and rock climbing sort of. We didn't climb the rock, but we got to the base of it. And this was maybe 3 or 4 days of maybe 2 days walking in and 2 days walking out. And I remember it started to rain. We don't have a tent or anything. So I looked for, we were in the middle, we were on an island in the middle of a river, and we found a higher spot. And I wouldn't recommend this, okay? I was 18 at the time, because you want to stay away from a river when it's raining. You don't want to be in a floodplain. But it was exciting for me, and I wasn't worried. I wasn't stressed. The kids were there. I wasn't like, we don't know, there's little kids. What's going to happen? I just remember finding logs, and I placed logs on either side. I started stacking them into a log cabin. These were driftwoods, and I think that's why I ended up on that island. As I'm looking back, I've never really told this story, but I remember it because there's a lot of logs that come down the river, and so I was able to use those and then put something across the top. And if you have a slant and then you use any kind of leaves shed water. And if you have the slant with a larger stick or log or something, you can poke the branches that are around the river and around the creek, any kind, but pine is great. And I love getting the pine because it breaks off really easy. And you can stick it in the cracks and it sheds the water. So yeah, there's a little bit of drip, but not much. And the more you stuff in there, the drier it gets. And all I can remember about that is I built that very quickly. We got in there and we had a great night. We had a great night, and it was pouring rain. But I do remember we were damp and pretty cold in the morning, and it was pouring rain. Okay. And I wanted to get these kids and myself warm. And I have built fires. Not everybody can do this, but I have built fires without matches. And with I used to be able to do it just with rubbing a stick like that, but it's a lot of pressure, a lot of speed, and I'm in my 50s. I haven't done it in a long time. But if you have, I remember I had a little backpack. Okay, I had boots. I used my shoelace on my boot. So I think I remember doing that, and found a branch that I could bend. And I made a bow, and I used that. That's the way I did it. And I got a fire going. People thought, it's interesting when I see people building a fire in a stove, and I see them doing it wrong, or building a fire in a fire pit, camping with no rain. And they got a torch, matches, they got lighter fluid, and they're still having trouble. I built a fire with none of that in a rainstorm before. Just got so hot. I found this tree that was dead, and the bark was sloughing off of it, and I just kept on piling that wet bark up. I just piled it so high. We had this huge area, and as the fire got going, it got dried out the bark, and the bark had a lot of BTUs, a lot of pitch, a lot of resin, and it just got hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. So we got so warm around that fire that we didn't feel like we were suffering at all. and there was snow that we were seeing right around the edges. That's why I think it was probably spring, because there were patches of snow, but it wasn't snowing, it was raining, and definitely cold. And we got warm enough to where we dried our clothes. That was the thing. We actually dried our clothes. It stopped raining. We put dry clothes on, and we hiked out of there in the high Sierras. That I convinced my dad when he was about 97. I wanted him to go, and I said, let's not bring backpacks or anything. Let's just go. Turned out when we got back into Sacramento after that, you know, adventure, they said it was one of the worst lightning storms ever. I mean, it was so incredible. And I'm like, yeah, I was with my dad, and we were up in the high Sierras, I think at 8 or 9,000 feet, something like that, in that lightning storm without a tent or anything. And I found a little cleft in a rock. I found a place in a, not like a real cave, but it was definitely out of the rain. And we just climbed back in there, and I used a lot of pine branches to make a soft bed. And he didn't complain or anything. And I remember we had a great night, but I do remember the flashes and loud noises. And it was in the cold part of the year. That morning I was freezing, but I got in down to my underwear, and I jumped in a lake that was nearby that had big icebergs floating. And when you get in an ice lake and you do it quickly and you get out, you're gonna force your body into survival mode. The body thinks you're in a crisis, which you are, but you're in control of it. So you get out of the lake, and then immediately your thyroid, it's like turning up the temperature in your house, for your furnace. You're gonna start. The body says, this is a crisis. We got to survive. So you got to do it. There's a certain way you got to do it, but I felt so warm after getting into that ice lake and getting out. And my dad didn't do it, but I did.
In
And
1997, dude, he was scared.
yeah, well, he was in good health and stuff,
So
but
he was walking with you and carrying stuff. I mean, he was. I'm just amazed that
yeah, he could
well,
hike at that age. Yeah, he had no problem hiking.
that's rare. That is rare.
In fact, he was 97 when he was hiking, well, walking, I should say, 5 miles was his daily regimen or regime, was 5 miles a day. You had
That's
mile
encouraging.
markers. On Molokai, he lived on Molokai, so there's mile markers. So he would go, he lived at 19 and he would go back. So he'd go 5 miles
I think
every
you
day.
mentioned he died at 101.
Yes.
I mean, that's an
Yeah.
amazing.
And he was in good health. And we had been to the hospital because Social Security wanted to make sure he was still alive and we weren't just stealing money. So they said, you need a doctor report, and so we went in because he didn't have a doctor. He didn't have primary, he didn't have any medications, he didn't see a doctor. But that doctor said, well, you've got another 20 years. There's people in their 60s that aren't as healthy as you. So that was when he was 100. And we drove home, and I said, Dad, what are you going to be doing the next 20 years? Like, you have a lot of stuff to do. He said, I got a lot of writing to do. I got stuff. Yeah, I'm excited. But we were going through some challenging times with the property. I ended up donating the property to an organization, and that organization was going to use it for humanitarian purposes and for good purposes, and they didn't do it. And so it really broke my dad's heart. And it still broke my heart. It's been 20 years since we did that. And so he was alive and saw that. And I think he was pretty distraught about that, because I hugged him goodnight the night before he died. And he said, "Son, if I'm going to die, let me die. Don't resuscitate me." In the morning, he didn't get up, and I looked over. My mom was there, my kids were there, and he was just laying. We had a day bed, and there was a wood stove, and he liked to be near the wood stove. So, because he was always kind of thin and small man, and he was smiling. It's like, I said, Dad, are you okay? And then no response. He was purple, but he had a smile on his face, and that's how he went. Was at home with his family, with a smile. And So I sent his body to research, which he wanted me to do in Redlands, California. And they spent 2.5 months researching his body for all kinds of anything. But there was no osteoporosis, there was no arteriosclerosis, any plaque in the arteries, no endothelial cells were perfect. His protein was perfect, no protein deficiency. He was really a healthy man. So I think he just, when you get to a certain age, you can actually almost decide, like, and then not wake up or something because he didn't wake up. He went to sleep.
Um, you said he was eating a lot of the foods that you mentioned earlier, like seeds and.
Yeah, I'll just tell you. So his parents were British Columbia people that homesteaded. So you go 50 miles up a lake by rowboat. Took days and days, and they had log cabins. And some of our family have gone up there to see some of those things. They're abandoned, but they lived off wild game until my dad was born. They had come down through Washington to Portland, Oregon, where there was a hospital being built, and they set up a tent. And my dad was born in a tent on those grounds of the hospital. And they started learning about more healthful diet and living. But the thing is like when I go to Philippines, sometimes the options aren't there. You can't decide. There's no buffet. There's no salad bar. Nothing. And so they were concerned with my dad because they were eating a lot of venison and buffalo, moose. But my dad, when they put meat in his mouth, he spit it out. When he, at a year old, when they were trying to wean him from mother's milk, she breastfed, and my grandpa would hold his mouth shut and then think he swallowed it, and then got tired of holding it shut, and it would just come out of his mouth. So he was malnourished compared to the rest of the family and his younger brother and sister and others. But he got through that. They had limited food, so you could say that he has been a vegan from birth. But it's an odd situation because the family were really big on eating wild game. Throughout the years, you could see the difference. His younger brother, for example, my uncle, had total hip replacements, had double open heart surgery, bypass surgery, all kinds of different things. I can't remember. His sister had lots of surgeries, was always in the hospital. At 97, he was out on his walk. He fell, broke his leg, not his hip, but his leg. And they put a pin in, and he was up and walking after that, and it calcified and knitted together really well. And he was fine, after that. So, um, other than that, he didn't go to hospitals or doctors. He even got through, I hope it's okay to say this, but he went through the polio thing. He was alive during the Spanish flu, okay? And he didn't take any of the vaccines. He didn't take the polio vaccine. A lot of his friends got polio. He worked in a TB ward, working with people with tuberculosis. He didn't get tuberculosis, but he worked with them. He was a pre-med student. He should have gotten a lot of things. He did get typhoid fever once, and he survived that. If you know what that is, that's a lot of times a fatal, especially back then. He always said those that live in the country, as opposed to the city, if there's hard times, they can live like kings and queens. And so I always remembered that. And, based on experience, but also the way I was raised, you got to have water. And I'm not talking about a well. People buy land and they dig a well. Or they buy property with a well. The water is far down. You got to figure out how to get it up. And you got to have electricity sometimes. It's nice to have electricity, not a rope with a big long bucket or something, and it gets dirt in it, pulling it up. But if you can find a spring or maybe an artesian well, something where the water comes up, or like in Hawaii, we have rain catchment. We're in an area where there's plenty of rain. We have plenty of water. But a spring, a creek, some source of water is super, super important for survival. Filters are great, but it's nice if you can just drink it right out of the ground, because the ground has the ability to filter it as well. So he
So
taught me. Yeah.
so he taught you. some of that.
Well, he taught me to make sure that you have good soil, you have sun exposure in certain areas, because there's, depending on where you're at, you need to have the sun exposure, because the sun goes, south or north depending on the time of year, and you want to make sure you have those things on property if you're going to survive a difficult time.
I didn't expect it to go in this direction,
I didn't. I didn't either.
but I wanted to say what's coming sort of a lot of the discussion is that like God's green earth has pretty much a lot of things we really need, and for survival, one, and two, for life. It's sort of self sufficient if you know how to go about it.
Obviously, I'm passionate about this stuff, right? So to be able to run into a forest and go through the forest, whatever time of year it is, and be able to find food is liberating. It's a very neat thing to be able to do. And I want to say, you got your blood in your body, that's red. Plants have juice, it's green, very close to the blood. The center molecule is different in blood. It's, I guess, iron makes it red. But the most prolific color in nature is green. And it's not that we have to go out and figure out, like, is this edible? You just need to figure out what's not edible. And there's only a few of those things. And then everything else that's green is edible, especially grasses. Um, so I go out and I eat these things, and I make salads, and of course, if you look at our ancestors and like Native Americans, I'm part Cherokee Indian, acorns was a really big part of their diet. Like rice is a part of the Filipino diet. There's so many oak trees across the United States. There's plenty of food to survive if you just know how to process acorns and get out the tannins. If you have a creek or something and you can leach it, but they typically would pound it and make a flour, make pancakes, make a basket that they could dump water through and rinse out the tannins. But tannins are not like deadly poison. It's just bitter, and you don't want to get too much tannic acid in your body.
What are tannins?
Tannins is it's a chemical that's in plants that protects it from the bugs eating it. It's in oak leaves. It's in the acorns,
And you can
and
like see that, or
you can leach it out. You can rinse it out.
I see.
It's the same thing that's in olives. With olives, if you cure olives, and I'm in olive country right now, they put lye. And lye, you put an acid with a base, it changes the chemicals, so there's no longer an acid. So, but in natural worlds, it's kind of
Interesting.
hard to find lye. You could put acorns in a bucket and put some lye, and then they're going to end up being like an almond, turn like a nut. So it's gets rid of. You got to soak it a while, but I like to do it the Native American way and just make the flour and leach it out. I make dressings out of acorns and put on the greens, and that's always delicious. Some people that I've given that to remind me, oh, that was the best dressing I ever had, and I'm like, it was just acorns from the backyard. That's all it was.
So I know, David, you had one question, real quick,
No,
or
I
a question.
remember you told me about the pine. You could get actual pine, and it has some nutrition. And I've read about this. I've never done it myself, but you could also in the trees you could like put a spout and get some syrup or water. There's a lot of things that you could do with
Yeah.
trees that people have no idea. They're just looking at them like, oh, these are just trees.
So
Let me add to that real quick before Steve you jump in, because I think there's a story that connects really well. I don't know if you guys are familiar. There's a channel that I follow with my son. It's called Outdoor Boys. He has
I
the
don't think
gentleman. Have you heard of him?
I haven't. No.
No, check him out.
It's kind of interesting. I'm a nature boy. I'm a musician, but I don't get my inspiration from other people that do that much. It's just the way I've lived my whole life. You can see behind me here, I got my keyboard and I play music and stuff, but it's kind of like it comes through my own experiences and stuff. So I don't know, and I don't watch a lot of TV, and I don't look at a lot of social media. I don't scroll. I like to input stuff so people can learn, and I'm not against learning from other people. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's just throughout my life, I I didn't know who Michael Jackson was growing up, or Elvis Presley, or I was really sheltered. I lived in the forest. I was homeschooled, and my parents didn't really know, I think, how much I like the forest and living off of the land. When I go through the forest, I see the pine, talking about pine trees. The bark looks like little crackers, and I pulled them off and ended up eating those and chewing on them, just because I like the flavor and the feel in my mouth. And I remember I was over at my friend's house after I had this little accident. And he gave me some pine bark. I saw a bottle that said pine bark extract, and of course, I always take my things out of the capsules. I don't swallow I take it out and I put it in my mouth, and I'm like, wow, this is. It reminded me. I mean, it was obviously pine bark powder, basically. So that product became popular, and they started a product called Pycnogenol because of the proanthocyanidin found in the pine bark. And there was a ship that they kept in their logbooks. Nobody got scurvy. Nobody got sick. And so they started researching, why that was, and they found in the logbook they were chewing on pieces of the ship. They didn't have lemons, they didn't have limes, they didn't have any way for their vitamin C. Uh, so scurvy is basically a lack of vitamin C. Proanthocyanidin is an antioxidant that is so powerful, it helps the body's immune system fight infections and diseases and germs and stuff like that. And that exists in pine bark, and of course, it exists in grape seeds. That's another really.
So I wanna tie this to this is interesting. So it sounds like you've not heard of these guys, Outdoor Boys, but this corroborates what you're saying. This gentleman lives in Alaska, and basically he does videos with his kids or on his own, like where he survives out in the wild, like in minus 30-degree weather with no blanket or very minimal stuff, right? I
Mm-hmm.
watch this with my son. He's very passionate about this channel. I love it. He's really good. The guy is very entertaining to watch. You should check it
I'll
out if
start.
you.
I'll start watching it.
Yeah,
I
Outdoor Boys.
promise
But
you.
anyway, one of the videos he actually had, he flies to Japan and he embeds himself in the, I think there are Navy SEALs or Marines. So with a unit that's stationed in Japan, and they go through a survival camp for a week. They're out in the forest with nothing, like no tent. He's allowed to bring his tent. He has like a little tarp, but they're out there on their own
Mm-hmm.
with nothing, and they have to survive on the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And he documents this, and this blew my mind because he's saying exactly what you just said. And me and my son are looking at each other. Did he just eat bark? What? And he's explaining, like, look, I can eat bark. It's actually nutritious, blah, 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 blah. And then he's like, oh, look, there's a bug. I don't know what bug. And he picks that up, and they're like fighting for, like, who's going to eat it first? I'm like, yeah. He's like, this is actually very nutritious. Then they find, and this blew my mind, and they find a venom and snake. I want to say, I don't remember what it was, and it's in Japan, but they're like fighting who can grab it first and like fry it up. And I'm like, what? It's venomous. He's like, it's venomous. If you know how to eat it, it's actually very nutritious.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, it actually corroborates a lot of the stuff you're saying because they're like living off of grass, off of pine needles. And he's explaining how this is how they're going to survive over the next week. You should connect with this guy because I think you guys would have an amazing chat.
Yeah.
I don't know where he gets his information, but the SEALs, they were commenting how they could sleep out and starts raining, and I guess they got some kind of training where it almost didn't bother them. To your point of kind of living in nature and really enjoying that experience, and they were like filming them, and he's out walking around with a tarp, but they were sleeping in the open.
Well, there's a couple of little tricks to that. I'll tell you one that I've followed when I travel anywhere in the world. I don't sleep on any of the beds. I sleep on the floor beside the bed, which is the harder the better for me. So wherever I go, I don't have to worry about back pains or beds being different because. And I met one other older man who did the same thing. He came to visit me, and I saw him sleeping on the floor beside the bed, and I was like, "Why are you're doing that too?" And so there's certain little things that I've done all my life. Growing up, I always slept outside. My bed was always made. I was always finding a place outside, right on the ground. I wanted to just be right on the ground. And I've had rattlesnake under my bed curl up before. Woke up with something sniffing and it was a porcupine once. I used to feed the deer. I ended up having food in my sleeping bag. And I forget who it was, got a picture. We have it in our album. I remember the flash, and I was surprised. But they wanted to get a picture of me feeding the animals. The animals would come around me, and I was feeding them as I was sleeping. I loved. That's probably why I'm more into the plant thing, because the animals were all my friends, and I was feeding them, and I was learning from them and eating what they were eating.
That's all the time we have for today on A Life Prepped. However, remember, whether you're a seasoned prepper or just getting started, Life Prepped is here to help you be prepared for anything and any emergency. For more tips, tricks, and expert advice, head on over to our website at lifeprep.com. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to our social media channels. We'd really love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Also, join the conversation or continue the conversation using the hashtag LifePrepped. Till next time, have a great day.